All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about The Final Empire, Book 1 in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Man, am I excited to talk about this book. I've read this many times now, so my perspective might be a little different, but I am very excited to talk about Brandon Sanderson stuff because he is one of my favorite writers, and I think he is one of the best fantasy writers of the modern day. So, summary for the Final Empire. Basically, a it's kind of a take on if the bad guy had won in a previous fantasy novels, and the characters are living in that world now. So they're living in the world run by like the Dark Lord, essentially, and it's kind of this ragtag group of thieves trying to do this job, this large scale mission against the Lord Ruler, who is this Dark Lord of this world, and it's a little bit about their struggles and the struggles of like how the general populace is treated, and how these thieves can kind of be heroes in a way. This book is it's no longer my current first recommendation to a new fantasy reader. It was up there for a while, being generally what I told people to start with if they wanted to get into fantasy. I think that's been taken by Cradle, because Cradle I think is a little bit easier to get into since it's so short. This is still a great first fantasy book, I think, for people. It's a little bit longer though, so I know that not as many people have as much time. But if you are interested into getting into fantasy, this is a good book to check out. So, let's go into some pros, right? Let's talk about the positives of this book. Biggest thing in this book, I think, is, I mean, Sanderson does a lot of things very well. Characters are a huge thing that I think he does super well. Each character feels extremely distinct from each other. Vin, as essentially one of the main characters, I would say she is the main character, but we get a lot of perspectives in this book. The story of her and her character and how she acts, and Sanderson is very conscious of making sure that when we're in her head and when she's doing actions, even when we're outside of her head, it makes sense for her character and the growth that she's going through. And the growth she goes through in this book is fantastic, and she is honestly one of my favorite characters. I really, really enjoy her, and I enjoy the whole team too. I think the whole much of the team, Ham, Breeze, Doxson, they're very much side characters. Clubs is another one, but they have like these distinct personality traits, and like the way that they're used gives them like, some of it is like, to me it's like, okay, there's this, they're not talked about as much, but there's this depth to them that I feel like a lot of authors fail to get in their side characters, especially. Sazed's another big one for me as a character. I think Sazed is one of my favorite characters in this series. But even in this book, I really like him a lot. I do think this is definitely the book that he has the least growth, but he's very interesting. And then we've got Kelsier, who is fantastic, and I really enjoy. I enjoy what he does and how he does things, and it's this, like, he knows he's egotistical, but he like owns it, and he just lives by that. Plotting is good for this book. Great story leading up. Sanderson does this thing in all of his books. This is one of the books that you can tell, but there's always the don't expect you you expect something to happen, and he sets it up in a way that makes it seem like X is going to happen, but it's always Y, which is really, really cool until you get his pattern down, and then you start to realize exactly what he's doing each of the times. And then you start questioning, is this going to be a twist? Am I getting fooled right now? Which kind of makes you examine everything a little bit more deep, which is interesting. I think that's a really cool thing that he can do as a writer. Critiques of this book. So overall, this book's great. Like, there's a lot of positives I could talk about, but the characters are the biggest thing for me. And the world. The world building is great. The magic system's great. It's focused on metals, so you have to... Certain people can digest metals and burn them to gain certain powers, and the powers are, as always with Sanderson magic systems, there's pros and cons to them. It's more about how the character overcomes the limitations of the power rather than having a magical power that does each X, Y, or Z. Just working my way through the book piece by piece. I would say that as a critique, it's really hard for this book, but I think there's a few parts that can drag in this book. Ironically, for me, it's not the party sequences. I actually could have used a little bit more of those, I think. There's a lot of like balls and stuff like that Vin goes to, and I think those scenes are actually really interesting, and I actually would have liked a couple more. I actually thought there were more in this book when I was rereading it than when I did when I initially read it. But there are a few parts that kind of like, okay, cool, you're setting up this. And there's almost like this is like a positive and a negative at the same time. But Sanderson does this thing, which I think is something that if you're interested in writing, you should really look into, which is always creating another problem for his characters to overcome. So, X starts going well, and then we'll give a little bit of a spoiler. So they start prepping to this rebellion, and they... I don't want to spoil this. Basically, there's just situations that happen that it's like, okay, we've got this, we're getting this set up, and then a problem happens. That's good. It's done a lot throughout this book. To the point where I think you could have maybe shrunk it down a little bit to make the book just a little bit smaller and make it a little easier to get through for the average reader. But overall, I think the book length is fine, and the problems that are created are always done in a way that's beautifully executed. It's always done in a way that's like, okay, they've got this. Oh no, they don't. Never mind. This is a huge issue. And then, they've thought of a way to work around the problem. And I think that's what makes this book so good, is the characters learning to overcome these issues. This is by far, I don't think this is, well, it really depends, because I think Stormlight is going to really depend on what happens in book 5 and on. But this is probably one of Sanderson's best series that he's written. We'll get into more talking about book 2 and book 3, which I'll probably go into more spoilers for and kind of discuss what I like and what I don't like about it overall. But this book is a great spot to start if you're interested in getting into fantasy, or if you're looking to get into like Brandon Sanderson's universe and all his books that he's written. I think this is an excellent book to start at. Probably the book I'd recommend you start at, honestly. I think there's other books that people would probably say, you should start here, I think this is a good way to get in, see if you like his style of writing, and if you do, then to branch out and read his other stuff, because I think Stormlight's way too big to recommend people starting with. So, All right, I think that's going to be it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to like if you do. Comment down below. I know plenty of people that have read this book. I'm always excited to talk about this with people and discuss, pros and cons, and what you like and what you don't like about Sanderson and this book specifically and his writing in general. And always be sure to subscribe. Helps out the channel a lot, and I appreciate it. Thanks.